From here, we're going to go down to South Point, and this is the southernmost part of the United States, and the trade winds come in here at a good brisk rate. There's always a 20-mile-an-hour breeze blowing here day and night, so what a good place to put some of these wind generating towers to generate some more electricity for the island. And it looks like they work very well. The only thing, I think that salt air probably takes a toll on them, but when we go out on this peninsula, it's all rangeland and we see nothing but cows and horses. You can't even really grow a very good garden unless you would have some way of really protecting it. The buds on all the trees down here have dried on the windward side, so the tree grows to the leeward. And so we notice some of these trees that have been here quite a while have actually blown over to where they became out of balance and toppled over, past a few little ranches, and then on down to South Point. And this area during World War II was a big military base. I really liked it down here. If it wasn't for the ocean, you would swear you're in Montana or Wyoming by the wind. We see a few cars down here, so we go down to investigate. And there's a nice little Polynesian woman working right out of the back of her car, selling gadgets that she's made to the tourists. They're bone fish hooks and things like that. And where were you raised?
Born and raised here in Ka'u.
Oh,
right
is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. And these are bone carvings on.
Got some with cow bones.
Oh.
We've got the turtles with mother of pearl shells.
Oh yeah. And is that shrimp shells, that bracelet?
These are troca shells. These are other shells.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's interesting.
They look like shrimp.
Yeah.
If we were to color them orange, it'll be perfect for shrimp.
They would be, yeah. Down on the cliffs, just overlooking right on the end of the world, overlooking the ocean, we see some people fishing. One guy just caught a fish as we come, and I noticed this fish pole was wiggling like crazy. And I ran up to the guy like I was telling him something new, and I said, "Hey, I believe you got a fish on that hook." And he says, "Yeah, I've got a fish on the hook, but he swam down and got it hooked on the bottom, and we can't get him loose." He said, "We're trying just to let him swim off." And he said he's a big old guy. He weighs about 40 pounds. He said, "I wish I'd have brought my diving gear. I'd have gone down after him." And so I said, "What do you need for diving gear?" "I've got a face mask and a snorkel." And he said that would work, but he says, "Do you have fins?" And I said, "No, I haven't been able to master using fins, so we didn't bring any with us." He says, "You know, I believe I know a place I can borrow a set of fins from somebody else here." So he went over and borrowed the fins from another fisherman. Then he walks down the rocks. He walked down to a place where he could get down the rocks and get to the ocean. And so he's going to actually go out there and get onto that fish. He gets right down at water level, gets the face mask, some water in it, straps it on, and he's ready to go out in that breaking sea. Good thing it's him, not me. I couldn't swim for a minute out there, but these people that are raised here swim like fish. While they're raised on an island, I guess you have to swim. They do the kite fishing out here. They have a kite fly their hook out, way out, and then they drop it down and hope for a fish to come. Well, he's in that salt water, and he is swimming faster than I ever imagined anyone could swim. And so he'll go way out to where the fish is hung up and try to go down and get it. The other person is minding his pole up above, and we can see him way out there. And pretty soon we see just his fins stick out of the water, so we know he's diving. And he goes down, and he's down for quite a while. He apparently sees a fish now, and so we see him go down. And I was beginning to get a little nervous, being a land-loving person. I was afraid that he might get hung up and not come up. But that wasn't the case. In a little bit, we see him surface again, and then he makes a beeline for shore. So everybody's anxious to see what he has to say. Again, he's such an excellent swimmer, it takes him next to no time to get back in to where he can get up on the rocks and climb back up on top of the cliff. And everybody's anxiously waiting to hear what he has to say and what he saw out there. Most every one of these people we met there out here were just absolutely excellent swimmers. They probably start out when they're just very small children. He merges from a gently breaking sea onto the rocks and then crawls up the rocks and doesn't even seem to be that winded.
He's too deep for the gear you had. And how big did you say he was?
About 40 pounds.
Wow.
Nice one.
Yeah. Wow, darn, I'm sorry to hear that.
Okay.
Sometimes there's nothing you can do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So after hearing the disappointing news on getting that big fish in, I go for a short hike down to where there looks to be an old village site. Here's an old salt pan, I think is what this is, and they put seawater in it and let the sun evaporate it to make salt to process their fish and to use to season things, and also probably to trade. And then it looks as though there's been an old indigenous housing complex here. We see where there's been at least a couple houses. And then down next to the water, it looks like there must have been a pretty good fishing village. We see all these canoe mooring holes. They've bored holes in this basalt, and then they could take a line and tie their canoes up here while they were up at the village site. And so there were just a lot of them here. So there must have been a lot of people fishing right off South Point in this rough water where the trade winds come in. It's said that it's an excellent spot to fish because the fish follow the shoreline around, and then they come in close right on this point. More of the canoe mooring holes in the rock, and another salt pan. It looks like somebody's decorated it with some seashells, and more of the canoe mooring holes in the rock. And then another, looks like another village site. They must have been really busy stacking rocks in prehistoric days. Several people were looking down in this hole, so I looked down in it, and I see, you could even see the waves come up in that. It's almost like a spouting horn where there's a hole, and then you can see the waves actually coming up and splashing around. We go through the rainforest with some giant ferns, and then we're heading back to our campsite. The next day, while driving on this rather narrow road with some potholes, the sun was shining right in my eye, and I didn't see a pothole, and I hit it kerbang. And then the tire instantly lost the air. So I've got to dig my jack and spare tire out and try to get this tire changed. Like usual, the culture is just very, very nice here, and within a little bit someone pulled up and gave me a hand. One thing about this island, no one's uptight, and everyone is extremely kind and considerate. It's just a wonderful, wonderful culture. I was putting the jack in the wrong place. I've never used a jack like that before. Mine are always different. And this person stopped and showed me where to put it, and it didn't take long to get that bad tire off and a new one on. And then I realized I'm driving on this tire that you're not supposed to put very many miles on, and we're going quite a few miles, and so I thought I need to fix this tire. So we went down to the hot ponds, and there were some guys there that were selling coconuts out of the back of their truck. They say they go out and they get paid to cut them down, and then the people give them the coconuts and they bring them down to the hot ponds in hope of selling them to the tourists. It doesn't seem like they were selling very many of them though. Well, we get that tire off there real soon, and I'm anxious to see what happened to the tire. When we get a look at that wheel, my heart sunk. I thought, uh-oh, looks like I've ruined the wheel. But I was raised on a ranch, so I know how to fix that. I went down the hot ponds and found a guy that had a tamping bar. And so we took that bar and give it a couple good licks, and the rim popped back out where it should be. I put air on it, and we went on. Looks like Marge has found another vegetable and fruit place at Hilo. She wanted to go to the farmer's market. So we're going to load up on a little bit of that really nice fruit. And this farmer's market is absolutely huge. Just thousands of people go there. Right in Hilo, here's an old setting hen. And these chickens kind of all look alike. It's some breed. It's almost like the fighting chickens that grow over here. And then feral cats. They're just every place you look, there are cats of all sizes and colors. We returned to Volcanic National Park, and here's a sign that says poor air quality. But we're going to go on in and camp anyway. It probably is no worse than staying in a city. Past the giant ferns and back down to our favorite campground. The next day, we're out again at first light in the morning, leaving the national parks, only this time we're going to go down on the dry side of the island and check out a few interesting sights on the drier side of the island. Today will be the day that we check out the Captain Cook Monument. You can rent a canoe to go out and actually go right to the monument, but we could see it very well from where we were, and besides, the water was a little choppier than I'd like to go in a canoe. They're old, ancient village sites. There's a very large flat area that the native Hawaiians had built in prehistoric days for their village and other uses right on top of this mound they have built up. All around the area we can see where their village site was, and this must have been a huge village site with lots and lots of people living here before Captain Cook. It's entirely possible from right at this very site is where the natives first saw the sails of Captain Cook's ship sailing over the horizon in 1779. This was a totally life-changing and cultural changing event for the native Hawaiians. There's excellent rock work that must have taken a lot of time, patience, and skills, and this rock work has withstood the test of time. There are many individual houses, and of course there's always a large ceremonial site at most of these sites. This site looks like it took in quite a few acres right down next to the bay where they could have launched their canoes very easily to go on fishing trips. There's always a fresh water source at every village site. They could use this water for everything you'd need, even irrigating some of their crops. And at most sites they even raise some fish. A definite must is to go down and check out the city of Refuge. We see all sorts of replicas of the village site, and of course the stonework is the real deal that was left by the native Hawaiians. If you made it to the city of Refuge, if you had done something, then you were forgiven if you could make it that far. We see some of their Hawaiian war clubs and drums, and then some more replicas of some of their houses that they would use with thatched roofs. We saw this X in a rock. We later decided it was a surveyor's corner marker. And there's even some limb casts and tree casts in some of the rocks, and of course grinding holes for preparing food. And near the sea are numerous wood carvings of their gods, and even some replicas of their thatched houses which they lived in at that period of time. When Captain Cook arrived on the Hawaiian Islands, he must have seen a sight similar to this, a very well organized community. I found several rocks that had X's etched deeply in them, and I've decided this was definitely early surveyors leaving their marks. I found in 3 different locations, I found one of these. And then more and more of their structures. Some of these were to house their canoes, and others were their homes. They were well enough organized, they realized they had to keep their canoe under a shelter, and these shelters would work very good to protect a canoe from the elements. There is, of course, at this site, a fresh water source which has fish in it. The natives would have used these fish for eating, and then all the fresh water, they could have used it for the things they needed fresh water for. These little fish still cruise around their freshwater ponds, which the natives have very well built. Even little birds are pecking around the edge of the ponds. The pond is an excellent spot to bathe a dirty bird. The city of Refuge must have been a very special site for native Hawaiians, and I think anyone would have loved to have lived here. And there's even a little stockade around some of their statues and their houses. That's to keep enemies from easily crawling into their space and hurting someone. Those houses look to me as if they would have been very extremely comfortable. There's just a small door to crawl in. That night we decided to go back out to South Point and camp. We want to hike out to Green Sands Beach, and besides, this is a really quiet, nice place to camp, even though the wind might blow, but we don't mind the wind. The next morning at first light, we hear the crowing of a rooster, and here he comes, a fine specimen of a chicken, and he's got a lot to say this morning. We need to get a very early start to go out to the Green Sands Beach. It's a 2.5-mile hike out a ratty old road which has been beat out in some places 5 and 6 feet deep through the sand and clay by vehicles which have gone out here. And when they get one of these roads where it's impassable, they just move on and make another road alongside it. But it's a nice hike out here, and we've got a nice early morning breeze blowing. People are all the time gathering coral and placing the white coral on the black basalt and making names and hearts and pictures. We see a row of stacked rocks, and this was at one time used for cattle ranching. Before they had barbed wire, they just piled rocks and made their fence. Right where the fence goes down is supposedly the point where it's the southernmost point of the United States. In places there are blankets of tiny little wild flowers that grow close to the ground. I guess if they were very tall, the wind would whip 'em to death. On the way down, again, we find the rocks piled high at an old village site where the native people moved in here when the fish were in here and fished in this area. There's even the narrow little canoe sheds and lots, and all of the rocks piled around were an excellent idea. Not only did they make a good structure and then they'd put a thatched roof over it, but then they held the heat in at night and kept it a little cooler during the day. Lots of housing. All the shells scattered around inside on the floor were evidence of the native people gathering shellfish from the rocks down on the beach and eating them right in their little housing structure. And there it is, the Green Sands Beach as we saw it in early morning light when we first arrived. The world's only green sand beach is right below us. So we'll go around. There's a set of steps on around, and we'll take the steps down. It's a little easier than crawling down the cliffs. We see little shelters, and I don't know whether those are modern or from the indigenous people. They look modern, though. Marge is getting plenty of pictures of the world's only green sands beach as we go down onto the beach itself. After we took in the Green Sands Beach, we wanted to go back to the city of Refuge and go on their hike. The day before when we were there, it got too late. So I hike up the trail past their picnic area, and I see village sites all the way up for about a mile. the wall behind us is where Samuel Clemens described it as a wall of lava waterfalls, and it's quite colorful. The native people must have really enjoyed it here, and they've done rock work all along on the way up, and they've even built a ramp to get up on this cliff. It's built of really large stone, and up on the way up the cliff there are numerous lava tubes where they've got the entrance so people won't be getting in them, but I expect they were used considerably by the native people that inhabited the place at the city of Refuge. The native people must have had an eye for beauty. They have some very interesting texture on the rocks that they've stacked, and more lava tubes sealed off to keep the tourists out of them. Rivers of molten lava came out of these lava tubes and ran down over the rocks, leaving a nice smooth texture. And the valley below, almost as far as you could see along the natives' trail, is village sites right in next to the cliffs and on completely out of sight. I found more of the X's that were scratched into the rocks at the city of Refuge. And there's another one. We think these are from early surveyors. We're going to visit yet another village site. This one is just below the Kona Harbor. And we go down there and find that the Polynesian people who settled here had actually built fish traps. These are big ponds where they let the fish go in, and then they could net them, get in there and stir them up and net them as they tried to get back out. And it looks as though it was a very successful village site too. Lots and lots of houses. But we're still looking for Viking ruin writing, and so we're checking out all the suitable rocks that could have petroglyphs or something on them. And we've found some very nice Polynesian type petroglyphs, Hawaiian type petroglyphs on the rocks in numerous places as we walk through a field where they're just scattered all over, but there are a lot of them out here. It's the things that they would encounter in their daily life, like fishing, canoes, and fish hooks. The Hawaiian people always made a lot of petroglyphs of humanoids, which looked like really broad-shouldered guys, maybe paddling a canoe. And we found some little pit marks in the rocks, right on the flat basalt that's flowed out. Even the scratch marks must have had some kind of a special meaning to these people. Then we find our first writing, but it's not Viking ruin writing. It's European stuff that apparently the missionaries had taught the people. The Hawaiian Flowers were pretty incredible. We went down to the beach at low tide. It was a nice calm day at low tide, and these little tidal pools were just absolutely cram full of little fish just swimming about waiting for the tide to come back in. Then we look out at sea and we see some big whales. These are the Pacific humpback whales, and they swim all the way down here from Alaska to have their calves in the warm water off Hawaii. and they don't eat one single bite while they're here, except the young probably nurse while they're here. Our next stop will be a village site which is over 600 years old. It was inhabited up until the mid-1940s, and the only reason people left, they ran out of water in their well. There's a reproduction of their thatched houses like they lived in. That sure looks neat, having a thatched house. If I had property in Hawaii, I would think of building a thatched roof house. Lots of flowers and lots of other structures. They had structures for everything, even sheds for their canoes, and they stacked rocks like every one of these Hawaiian villages we went to. They must have spent years stacking rocks. The first spot we see was where their burial site was. They buried in this site.
Looks like numerous burials here.
This is number 2. House site. Originally built as a house site, it was abandoned in the early 1800s and later used for burials. How was that?
There was a shed on top of this structure used to house their canoes. Then stone fenced in courtyards where they'd play games, kids would romp and play, and also certain places where they would grow gardens.
Thatch roofs covered these long walled enclosures where the canoes were stored. The canoe landing is nearby.
The framework for the house is made of bamboo, and then it looks like they've used a grass for thatching on it, and it's all put on piled stones around it. That helps hold the heat in at night and keeps them a little cooler during the day.
You want to know about the historic house?
Yeah, read about it.
This,
Oh, come in. Okay.
just a minute. I'll do it from this side. Okay, you ready?
Yeah.
This reconstructed house site with bamboo frame and pili grass thatching was occupied into the early 1900s.
Okay.
Whether his catch was large or small, the fisherman always gave a portion to the fishing god, who lived in this stone. In return, he received fish in abundance.
There are several salt pans here where they evaporated seawater and got salt. Another bunch of what I think are salt pans, unless it was for food processing. And this is the salt pans where they evaporated the seawater and saved the salt. On the site right in front of me is the place where they give their offering to the fish god. They'd always give a portion of their catch to the gods. Marge has even found a cotton plant here.
See? Look,
Yeah,
it's cotton.
I see some of that around here. It's definitely cotton.
Yeah, look at
I suspect this is a burial, maybe a more recent one.
Old H2 is laying here taking a nap. At first I thought he was dead, but he's anything but dead. He just comes up on the beach and takes him a nap, and he's branded H2. He's one of the extremely rare Hawaiian monk seals, which are definitely on the endangered species list. There, that dead seal decided to roll over and make himself at home. Oh, it's so nice to be up here and taking a nice, relaxing nap as he rolls over on his back, scratches a little bit with his flipper, and then continues on his nap. They come in on shore from sea, and they need to take a rest. He looks really big. I'm not sure how much he weighs, but he weighs a plenty. It sure must be a lot of work being a seal, 'cause he sure needs his nap, but bad.
The courtyard is right in front of us. We're sort of walking through it. And then they had their canoe houses and all the things they would need for a village here. Even a gaming board which is similar to checkers, where they could sit and play a nice friendly game of checkers. We're now at the well, which went dry, and so the people all had to leave, but this was the place where they got their fresh water. And number 9 is their salt pans, where they poured seawater into these hollowed out stones and let it evaporate. And gosh, there's a lot of them. And then they retrieve the salt. The stone right here looks like that would have been a food grinding stone. Individual homes, which would be homes for many families to live here, and then they had a little yard out back where they could grow a little bit of garden. Looks like this must have been another canoe shed. And then there were fish processing rooms, and they could pull their canoe in and out right down below us. This was a religious site where prayers and offerings were made. The offerings were left at the site right ahead of us.
The stone walls keep out the heat during the day, but warm the house at night. Thatch roofs on pole frames over the walls provided protection from sun, wind, and rain. The oil from the nut of the kuki was burned in a stone bowl for light.
The pit where food was cooked, they call it an imu.
The floor of these houses are paved with rounded basalt pebbles, and woven lahala mats are laid over the paving. Marine shell on the floor are from the meals eaten here.
Of the ocean, the presence and movement of every bird, fish, and marine mammal is important. When schools of apu are spotted, nets are laid from the canoes to surround the fish.
A checkerboard where they could sit and play checkers. The fishermen from this fishing village could look out to sea and watch all the conditions, and they'd know when to see fish and when not to. I'm looking for a whale out there today, but I don't see one. There's a little thatched house here, and then garden area out beyond it. A few banana trees here, and then this would be where they would grow their few things they would eat, taro and other things. And a cute little house with thatched roof built of bamboo. I expect all they did in it was sleep. Most of the living would be done outside. There are even a few bananas hanging on the banana tree. They're not ripe yet, but they look good.
A little bunch. Oh, here's another bunch. Bigger bunch.
More bunches of bananas.
Look at this.
Then more bananas.
The National
They're out
Parks
sailing in a replica
Bookstore
of a
Museum
early
down by
Hawaiian
Spencer
sailing
Park is sponsoring boat
This is,
rides
native
for some of the
Hawaiian
tourist
teaching
educational
sailing
things,
lessons
and they
to a bunch
teach
of
them
high
about
school kids.
the canoes that the native people
They could
use.
sail a lot
This
better if they
one
had a
would be
little
a
wind.
smaller one for use maybe going from one island to the other, or else just simply to go out fishing. It's not their huge Voyager canoes, but it looks like they're having a good time out there sailing around in the little bay. The canoe is beached right now, and the people are up on the bank, and it looks like a really good seaworthy sturdy canoe. The only thing that would worry me is if one of those lines parts when you hit a wave out at sea, but apparently they have them tied good enough you don't have to worry about that. This was one of the royal residents, and like most all the royal residents, there were fish ponds to grow fish and also to get fresh water. I see some more canoes up on the bank, and so I see some people working on this canoe, and this is one of their big Voyager canoes. It's thought to be similar to what the Hawaiian people came to the islands originally on. They are making some repairs and doing some maintenance work on this large Voyager canoe, preparing it to go to sea once again. And they take students out and teach them how to sail and how the Hawaiian people originally got here and traveled around the
Oh
world.
yeah, and you say this is possibly a replica of what the first people came to the Hawaiian Islands on?
That's the intent.
Yeah,
Rediscover what that is.
yeah, and how long was the largest one that was ever found?
Dr. Sonoro found evidence of one that was about 100 feet in Tahiti.
Oh,
But it was just fibers of wood in the indentation when they did their dig and excavation.
yeah. And so they'd put out to sea in these. Well, it's very good. I can see how they could. In about 1200, you say they...
Yeah, there's actually legends from the South Pacific that talk about the migration that made it to South America and brought back the sweet potato to the South Pacific, and it went through the South Pacific first and then came up to Hawaii.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah.
a lot of that is actually like, it's not just talking about, it's like evidence, like DNA, all kinds of stuff.
Oh, yeah. And how about the Vikings landing here? Have you heard anything of that?
Vikings in the Pacific, no. I know that the Vikings...
It sounds a little far-fetched, doesn't it?
But it's possible, because Hokulea's going on her worldwide voyage, and I'm pretty sure that we've circumnavigated the globe before. I know the Chinese did it by the 1500s,
Yeah.
but I think that the Polynesians, there's evidence of Polynesians all the way over in Brazil side. And
Oh, yeah.
So I'm pretty
The
sure...
other side of the continent.
Oh,
I'm pretty
yeah.
sure that, and in Egypt and in Mediterranean, there's some evidence of Austronesian or Polynesian type of cultures over there too. So we're pretty sure we made it around the world, but we have our mo'olelos, and then today genetics and stuff studies.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Didn't have it on. I wasn't expecting something that good. You say that the Spanish captured Polynesians and
Yeah, between the 15 and 1800s.
Uh-huh.
And while they were setting up their colonies in the South Americas and in Philippines and that side of the world, and the Portuguese, they would take whole islands, villages, like 300 people at a time, and relocate them into different colonies and plantations. It was called blackbirding.
oh, and were they used as slaves then?
Yeah, mostly
Oh.
slaves. Most of them never ever got home again, and so there's a whole island from Tonga that was captured, about 300 residents, and they ended up in Chile and got absorbed into the culture there.
Oh.
Yeah. So there's a bunch of talk.
Pigs and dogs, was it?
Coconuts, pigs, dogs. They brought a lot of plants with them actually. Uru, a lot of fruit plants, kalo,
Oh, how about the Terra? Did they bring it?
taro. Yeah, taro. was
Oh,
brought
yeah.
here.
So there probably wasn't a whole lot on the islands till they came, huh?
Probably not.
Yeah.
Doesn't really last too well floating on the ocean, and you can
Oh.
grow it by seed, but it likes to be grown from the core mostly. So
Oh, yeah.
rather than cross pollinating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
This is the Manu, and we're doing work right now on her inside, which is normally closed up. And this area is normally where we sleep, but right now we don't have our covering on, and everybody sleeps in a bunk. And that is the nav platform in the back, and that's where our navigator sits to steer us on the right course. And we're a single-masted canoe. And everything is held together by lashing, and that's Uncle Shardy.
It looks to be a very good seaworthy canoe, ready to take to sea for very long and educate people on how to sail and how their people got here. From the royal residence, you have an uninterrupted view of the two temples right up on the hill behind.
This temple was built in 1790 to 91. Its platform was crowded with ceremonial structures. Today, it is the location of cultural events.
The row of rocks directly in front of us is what divided the north and south part of the island. And then there are flowers every place you look. And this is our grand finale for our trip to Hawaii.